Sometimes with pride, we say we have the largest number of ChatGPT users, but what are we doing? Really, we are exporting our data and importing intelligence. Can we actually afford to do that?
He's saying India should build a 1 trillion parameter model.
This technology is so fundamental and it impacts so many different things that this is not an optionality for us to have.
Given that India has not participated in value creating platforms. We have built services, we have built apps, we have built usage, but we have not built platforms that accrue value in a major way. Our bet is that the model layer does that, and you can't restrict yourself to the model layer. That's why you do full stack.
What are the things that we have done so far that allows us to say Sarvam can do this?
To the best of my knowledge, outside North America and China, and if you leave aside Mistral, nobody has pre-trained from scratch a 100 billion plus parameter model.
From here to a trillion parameters, what's the capital do you think it'll require? Is it in the billions or tens of billions or hundreds of millions? And what's the number of GPUs you require? And how much do we have right now? Welcome to another episode of Lunchbreak with Lightspeed. Today we have a very, very special guests. Both founders of Sarvam AI, Pratyush and Vivek, are in the studio with us. It's been very hard to get them out of their product technology and company building cycles, and then get them into a room with us to talk about what Sarvam does. Thank you both for your time, and absolutely delighted in talking to you guys today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Amazing. You guys are now in a place where everybody in the country knows about what Sarvam does. But they all hear about it from WhatsApp. Like my mom has sent me a bunch of these forwards from Instagram about, is this the company that you talk about? Like, yes, it is the company. Is this what they do? Like, that's not all what they do. They do a lot more. So today we'll try to figure out and explain together, what does Sarvam stand for? Why does a company like this need to exist in India and for the world? So we'll get started. Maybe we'll start with you, Vivek. Tell us about what were you doing before Sarvam? What was your life's mission? What gravitated you towards starting a new company? And how did you meet Pratyush? And how did you guys come together?
I think I've had an interesting life. Let's put it that
yes,
way.
I have heard.
But I started off the regular way. I went to IIT and then went to the US, to Carnegie Mellon, got a PhD. But spent about 20 years, multiple startups, but actually in something very, very different. We were actually building software to design, semiconductor chips, and that's really what I was in that industry for 20 years. And then suddenly in 2007, really almost on a whim, I decided to come back to India, and I think that after that, I was still in the same industry for a couple of years, and I said, I need to do something different, and I had no idea what that different would be, and what it ended up being is really I spent 15 years of my life, and I actually building or being a small part really of what we call the digital public infrastructure of India, right? And as a full-time volunteer, and frankly, I worked on Aadhaar for a very long time. I've been involved with GST. I've been advisor to UPI. I've been advisor to the courts. And I actually, about 5-6 years ago, I got interested in Indian language AI, and actually that's where the first time Pratyush and I kind of got together to try and build things in the open source for Indian languages. But frankly, my view really, and the way I saw, and I really didn't think that I was going to do another startup. I thought that I'll be working in kind of, in the open source or working with government, helping government with various things. And I really thought that was really what I was going to do for the rest of my life. But, you never know what happens in life. I think I was actually stunned at, how this really can change, right? How this really can change the world, and how it's, and I've had the experience of building things at scale for India and things like that. And I said that, this is so fundamental, this technology, that we need to do something about it. But nevertheless, my first instinct was, how do I get, philanthropic money, or how do I, ask the government to kind of, build something there. But then after a while, I realized this is not something that can be achieved in that sense. And I think that's when, I asked Pratyush that, we need to do this. We need to do this.
So a full-time volunteer working with a full-time professor. I mean, that combination is, I think, one of the most unique founder combination that we've ever seen.
Yes.
Starting from philanthropy, a word that venture capitalists tend to not really like so much, and going to deep venture capital. So maybe, Pratyush, tell us more about like what made you feel like, let me leave this nice professor job at IIT Madras, I think, at the time, and then let's go drop all of that and jump in the middle of this whirlwind.
Vivek is right. He was the instigator. I was actually doing a dual role both at IIT Madras and Microsoft Research.
Oh, yeah, okay.
We also seen the first wave of identity crisis of researchers. So what do you do in this post-AI world? And I was also recognizing that it's a very big step change. So we have to be all in, right? And it was not clear what all in meant. But then Vivek was like, hey, okay, I know many people have caught up with various things, but why don't we just do this, right? Because we knew we need to do something all in, and we knew that you need a structure. We had tried other things in the past. And so this just felt right. And I think, frankly speaking, the only kernel of clarity was that we should build this ourselves, right? I think that thing, right, of building things ourselves, doesn't matter what the market share is, doesn't matter what, when is it going to happen, do you even know how to do it? No, answer is no. But it was clear that this is a step change, and it is clear that we'll have to be able to build this ourselves, right? Now, the word sovereign AI, etc., was not there. The India TAM of AI, etc., nobody knew, right? But I think that is what I guess is the builder's instinct. You say that this is a hard enough problem and valuable enough problem that we should have a company to do it, and there were luckily good investors like yourself who said that we should consider that. Right?
Take us through the first day in the room, right? I mean, you just raised money. Now what? Now it's all real. Now you got to leave your volunteering role, which I hear you never took salary for, which I really admire. And then you are doing part-time Microsoft and full-time role at IIT Madras. Now what was the first month look like? It must have been like complete chaos. Something that I think a lot of the founders really relate to is, how does it start for companies that eventually become successful like you guys? It's still early, but still it's an important step for these guys. So tell us what that was like for you.
It's interesting that, even though today we are mostly based in Bangalore, the start of the company is actually in Chennai. And in terms of, where people were, so we actually started with a boot camp. I think, we actually had an office in the IIT Madras Research Park, and because we were a company where we needed to start with, normally a startup starts with 2, 3, 4 people. We started with close to 15 people at the very beginning.
And free rent, I'm guessing. Frugal engineering.
Almost
free rent, okay.
Almost free rent.
We shall not speak about that anymore, okay.
But I think that, we just said that, I think the most important thing was to get everyone in one place and actually just kind of get together and do things as hey, this is how we're going to start about where we want to go.
Did you guys know, like, this is the direction, like this is day one, we got to build something big in AI, but models, hardware, agents, not even like clear idea what would actually work at that point in time. This is 2023, mid to late. What gave you the direction? This is where we should start paddling. This is the direction we should start swimming. How did that come about? Was it a journey for you?
Yeah. As Vivek said, I think it's about the team first. You need to assemble a team that can carry the ambition no matter what direction you're going, right? And that's where we were lucky. The work that we have done in the past lives, created, let's say, good karma that people wanted to come and join us, right? And frankly, a startup, no matter how much money, is a big bet, right? For people to leave whatever they're doing, and they came. I think it was very clear that we will train models. That part is very clear. Agents didn't exist as a notion. I think people are still figuring out application layer stuff. But again, we made one more contrarian bet. We were like, we said we'll do full stack. We'll application bhi banayenge. Let's train models also. Let's figure out how to run these things on GPU. So right from the early days, I remember there was about I think we did maybe a meeting in my living room, and there were like a room of 30 people or whatever from different places. We're just chatting about it. Right from the first day, it looked like, hey, we want to do quite a few things, right? That seems to be a little bit the DNA of the company. We want to train models. We want to play around with applications, see what we can build. And also, there was energy in the team to look at GPUs and how things run on them, how do you do inferencing, and so on, right? So, in some sense, if I were to combine these 2 points, one was the builder's instinct, we need to build it ourselves, right? And not everybody wants to think like that, right? The people want to play at the business model level and so on. The second was we want to sort of like look at the entire stack. So with that ambition, we started. Of course, it's not a straight line. You go through various left and right turns along the journey, and the area has moved like crazy. It's continuing to move like crazy. So there have been things, but I think these two have kept us going in the same direction.
And the other thing, of course, is that we wanted to build for India, and I think that was something that was, almost the core, tenet of where we came from and what we wanted to do. And I think that was something that, and we always wanted to be full stack. We wanted to we're not theoretical in the sense that hey, we're going to build something and then we'll let others figure out how it can be used. And I see we wanted to be to a place where we actually impact people, right? That's
So I think that is now in the name of the company, Sarvam, which I think you guys should talk about where that came from, and then maybe we'll just then start digging into what is the strategy for the company. I mean, build for India, okay, it's an approach, it's an angle. Full stack is an angle, it's a product angle, it's a technological angle. But why should this company exist? What did you see was happening in the world, in the supply chain of AI that made you feel like, you know what, we can build a large company supplying intelligence to a certain region, starting with India, with a certain approach, starting with, partial stack, then over time, full stack. I think what you call TRL readiness, right?
No, as far as the name Sarvam, actually, Pratyush definitely deserves the credit for that. I think the principles were quite simple. We said that, we wanted to have something which had an Indic flavor to it, and we wanted to have something which represented the inclusiveness, right? That this.
But why was that important? Like, why was that important? Was it a business decision or an emotional decision for you guys?
So I mean, there were 2 parts to that, right? So Sarvam, of course, in Sanskrit means all, right? So there are 2 parts to what we are trying to say by doing that. One is this should reach everybody, right? And we believe that even more strongly today, the world can easily go towards a K-shaped setup, right? Where some people have a lot more and many people don't have anything. It can also easily go to a place where everybody is so much more empowered with universal basic intelligence rather than income, right? And I think that was one side. The other side, and that was probably the more internal instinct, it seemed like only 2 companies, 3 companies are building it. In fact, Anthropic at that time, and not very well known at that time. So let's say OpenAI and Google are building it. It can't be that the most, you talked about supply chain, right? The most important component of a post-AI world, the value creating component of the post-AI world has to be built by only 2 companies. That cannot be, right? So I think the fact that more people should be builders was also an instinct, right? In fact, this dovetailing to your point about what this means for the company, we believe that the model layer is the linchpin of the post-AI world. This is the model layer that looks forward to the application layer and looks downward towards the infra layer, right? So unless you are doing cool things at the model layer, really believing and building and understanding and going deeper, the other layers will continue to get marginalized, right? That was a view at that time. Today, I think it is far more clear, right? The model companies continue to sort of like move upwards and downwards, right? And given that India has not participated in value creating platforms. We have built services, we have built apps, we have built usage, but we have not built platforms that accrue value in a major way. Our bet is that the model layer does that, and you can't restrict yourself to the model layer. That's why you do full stack, right? That is the core thesis, and there have to be multiple companies across the world. It can't be many, it can't be like hundreds. It'll be things maybe a dozen companies around the world who would have the mantle to then build at this core layer, which is expensive, which is R&D heavy, but then look forward and backwards towards applications and infrastructure. Right? And this whole stack is what needs to be built out.
Very clear. I love the term universal basic intelligence. This is heard it for the very first time. Thank you. So now let's talk about the tech. Starting with the model layer, going down and going above the model layer. What are you guys doing below, at the model layer, above the model layer? Can you just first give us the full full gamut of the products that you're thinking about?
Firstly, the models. Let me just start with that because that's where it starts, right? I think we as a company are positioned to both train small models and larger models, right? The small models include things like speech models, vision models, document models, and sort of like even models for things like embeddings and so on, translation. So these are models which are today powering a lot of the work we do in the space on usage of Indian languages and bringing that world to the AI world, right? So that is lots of these small models which are going back to our previous work on Indian languages, going back to our instinct in making these models more efficient, closing the gap in long tail of Indian language nuances and so on, right? And I think that is something we have been perfecting, and the team has depth, has experience, and we have been building that. That is one class of models. The other class of models is these large language models, which are capable of reasoning, math, coding, agentic tasks, etc., which are a completely different beast in terms of what it takes to train them. Many more GPUs, extremely larger data sets required, completely new area, algorithmic ideas and so on. But because we are doing both of them, we are also cross-fertilizing ideas. You can take reinforcement learning from the frontier model effort, which can then reach the other places. Like, for example, vision, we have a top-class model, sort of like borrow ideas from different places. So with models, we are interested in both of these, right? And we can talk a bit about our roadmap and so on. But training these models requires you to be able to manage GPUs at massive scale. For example, the frontier class model required us to work with 4,000 GPUs, ensure that we can run them reliably, scale the workloads on that, and so on. So too, the inference of the models at scale. We'll talk a little bit about what we are doing at scale. That requires us to use GPUs very efficiently, manage when to scale up, scale down things, and so on. So we do a lot of work at the GPU layer, and we're going to a little bit double down a little bit more on that layer going ahead, because we believe that high quality infrastructure is the bedrock of sovereign AI, right? And we believe that there are some gaps there in the market where the layer of the infrastructure as a service and the management of compute effectively is a missing piece that we are also building towards. So think of it like bare metal upwards. That management is something we're focused on. Then the models, and finally on the application layer, we have a bunch of things that we do. Very quickly, probably the biggest one is we have voice AI, where you can converse with an AI agent in voice in Indian languages, multiple Indian languages, low latency, low cost, accurately, right? And we'll talk about volume there. We're really scaling that up month on month. Then we have a product around the agentic space, where you can design agents that can do complex tasks, put together things across connectors, skills, and so on. And finally, we have a product around content creation. So we have stuff on dubbing. We've been doing some cool stuff there. You can translate books. You can even create audiobooks, podcasts, etc. So there's stuff around content, and we are now moving towards the vision domain as well. So that's the application space, right? And we are also sort of like across these three things, there are cross-cutting things. Sometimes an application requires a particular fine-tuned model, requires a particular way of inferencing. We look at that cross-cutting part as well. But this is roughly the lay of the land across the three layers.
Very interesting. And very complicated, because globally what we are seeing is some of these, like for example, if you look at Higgs field, that's like very video-centric model, and then just focus on that. So no one of our companies in the US just does audio models, or 11 Labs just does audio models for consumer enterprises. Like how much of this is, look, we should do this because it gets us from TRL3 on a certain product to a TRL7 and then maybe TRL9, and we'll see what happens. If it works, it works. And this is how a lot of the labs also operate. What's your strategy on having this sprawl of launches and then without losing focus and quality?
So I think even the definition of what focus and quality is changing with the kind of things.
I agree.
Kinds of things that are happening, right? So therefore, I think today, various definitions are changing, right? People talk about small models, right? What is a small model is the definition is changing about that, right? Today, maybe 2 years ago, somebody say a 7 billion parameter model is a small model. Today, they may say, okay, maybe a 30 billion parameter or 100 billion parameter is a small model. So what is it? I think some of those things are, of course, also changing. And of course, the speed at which you can do things is changing. So therefore, it's very difficult to say that I'm going to take one way and I'm going to stick to that for a long period of time. I think that flexibility on how you can actually take all the pieces and put them together. And putting them together has literally become, you can do it at the speed of thought, right? Literally, if you have an idea and you think you want to put things together in certain ways, I think that combinatorial way of putting them together in a way that is actually kind of scalable and usable has become much, much easier, right? So therefore, I think the opportunities are going to be many, but you have to also move quickly to actually leverage those opportunities. I think that the answer saying that there is a master plan that I can follow for a long period, I think that time has passed.
I love it. I think we see a lot of the best companies globally just almost making sense of the mess as a scale up, and it doesn't get easier. How do you guys maintain speed? And you are now how big of a company team-wise?
200 people out there.
How does that organized, and how do people coordinate with each other? You guys, and then maybe just talk about, you launched, in a very quick cadence, 14 things in the run-up to the India AI Summit, and they were all amazing launches. They're so well orchestrated, a rebrand that went viral globally, and a bunch of products that went viral globally. So much goodwill, both in this market and everywhere else. People in the US were talking about it. Head of states were talking about it in the US and in India. I mean, it couldn't have been just like, you wake up one day and let's just launch something and let's see. It must have been, years and years of work. So walk us through what led to that. How did you orchestrate it? I know some people didn't even know this launch was coming tomorrow, but you're a team of, I don't know, a few hundred people. How do they not know? How do you guys organize all this stuff? It's crazy.
No. So there is a fair amount of chaos that gets injected in the company for various reasons. But see, I will talk about 14 launches, but I think on the broader point of focus, I think there's definite value to focus, no doubt about it. But there's also a whole plethora of things which have come and died so quickly in the space, right? So, on that day, it does look like the best thing that's going to happen in AI, right? I think we have seen this again and again. So, we are builders. We think about it outside in from the capability perspective, and now the surface area of capability is now very, very broad, right? So, the cost of experimenting, the cost of doing things now has come down. As Vivek said, you can put things together quickly. I think the intangibles that compound in my mind are what you alluded to: brand, talent, and capital, right? I think what we have started to do now, and absolutely with in fact, we didn't even have an effective brand marketing strategy, and we started this whole thing. And what we realized is, out of the building that we did, the design that we did, the messaging that we put out there, we started creating value to the brand, right? And I think, and the brand is it's a substantial brand. It says we will build AI for the country and we will do it from scratch, and we are engineers, we're going to make it happen. We're interested in impact that is positive. So that's the brand, and I think there is a lot of value in being able to attract the right talent to that brand. Now, under that brand, there is going to be a focused efforts towards frontier tech, right? That will continue, and that is the core of why it exists, right? But on the application side, we are going to be creative. And we're going to try things, and we're going to ensure that we can reach out to the long tail of use cases that matter in the country. It's amazing. We are in the market, and the variety of people we interact with across individual developers, digital natives, small, medium businesses, enterprises, government, defense. It's a widespread. And that widespread of the market reflects a little bit in how Sarvam also sort of builds things out, right? So we are fairly comfortable as a company with having breadth in some places and focus in some places, but recognizing that some things are compounding, right? So to your 14-day thing, we said, hey, we can't wait until the event, which was the India Impact Summit that was happening in India, to do something, because hey, there's going to be a lot of noise on that day. Now, how do we stand out? That was the simple question, and the idea was, let's do 14 days of launches, right? Because there were 14 days to go, right? So it was just a day before, but it.
Did you have 14 products to launch?
We did. Sort of. But that's also as you said, it's not what we built on that day. The team was building and putting together. I think events like this concretize it. They make it clear for everybody, and I think that will continue to be sort of like the style with which we operate. So we'll keep focusing on some core frontier part. Other sides be creative.
And then how does that work? Because this, you got to have at least a cauldron of ideas that keep bubbling up and reach a certain threshold where it's actually valuable to spend more time. Like hackathons is one way to do it. At Google X, when I was there was a bunch of these idea marathons they would do for 3 months. And if you can't graduate to a product, you get killed, you don't get funded. And then when Ruth Porat came, obviously it became even harder to get funding even after 6 months of work. But that's for another day. How do you guys build this culture of forcing functions in time? Like you got to experiment, you got to come up with interesting ideas, and you got to get validation very quickly, and then you build it into something that may eventually, like Google used to have 20% projects, and Gmail came out of that, Google News came out of that. I'm sure a bunch of other interesting things came out of that. What is your culture internally for that?
See, by the way, just to sort of like little bit backtrack on what I said, right? See, you still need to build scalable systems. You still need to have things which are actually very good on core system metrics. You can't wipe code everything, right? So you need to have systems which are very good, and you're somehow playing at top layers of that, right? So you have, so for example, voice AI is something we have scaled out, right? And that has been a journey. I mean, that's taken time. We have sort of built every layer of it and learned it, and across the whole stack of models, application, and infra. So once you have core platforms like that, you can play at the top layer. So I just don't want to discount sometimes. You feel that you can wipe your way to a products. That is perhaps possible, but victory in the market is very different from getting something that is working. I think maybe the 20-80 ratio should be maybe 50-50 today, or maybe even more, 80-20 even. But that packing after the hacking is very important to actually sort of like get systems that are out there.
Hacking before the hacking, after the hacking.
Yeah.
Awesome. So now let's talk about the core of the company, the heart of the company, the models. What has been your journey to build these models, and then what would you do next? A trillion parameter model?
Yeah, no, certainly we'll be training much larger models. 1 trillion you mentioned is on the cards.
You think India should build a 1 trillion parameter model?
I think so. We need
Tell
to.
us why. Say more.
No, I think one of the things that, I think this technology is so fundamental and it impacts so many different things that this is not an optionality for us to have, right? I think that, and the ability of these larger models, that certainly there are many things that a smaller model can do effectively. But having the larger models actually to, even if you're using it just to distill and make smaller models that are good at various specific tasks and things like that. And some of these kind of things that we look, I think having these larger models is, I think, table stakes for being in the game, right? I mean, I would say that, in some sense, I think the one technology that I'd compare AI to is actually nuclear technology, right? And, the world has countries which are, there are nuclear haves and there are nuclear have-nots. And if we look at AI, right, I think it's very clear that the United States and China are going to be AI powers, right? No other country is in that league yet. And I think that, I think we have to make a decision as a country whether, we are going to make a bet for that. I think in the end, I think AI has, the ability to impact lives in a tremendous way, right? I think, I think when you look at something like UPI, right? For the first time you say, hey, something's better in India than anywhere else in the world. But then there are so many things that are not, right? And I think that AI actually, and deployed in the right way, can actually make lives of people, significantly better. And I think for that reason, we have to be, a nation where we, control our own AI destiny. I think it doesn't mean that, you just have to have I think if you're too far behind, then you'll become a digital colony, right? And, sometimes with pride, we say we have the largest number of ChatGPT users, but, what are we doing? Really, we are exporting our data and importing intelligence. And can we actually afford to do that? I think that's a question that we need to think deeply about.
Let's say, we've got to do it. We don't have a choice, is what you're saying. I agree, we don't have a choice. The question is it possible to do? Or is it a pipe dream that never happens? So just tell us more about, what are the things that we have done so far that allows us to say, Sarvam can do this? And then tell us, let's say, path from 100 billion to a trillion parameter model. What is the gap? How do you go fix it? How do you go fill it? What do you need?
Firstly, on the previous question, I would also like to say that This is not a summit to reach. This is a capability to have. It's almost like, think about it like weapon systems, right? Weapon systems are systems, and you can see where every country lies on that, on every weapon system, and you have to keep playing at the game, right? So I think AI is similar. We are very, very early in a dramatically different technology way. We are year 3 or year 4 after ChatGPT, right? And OpenAI started in 2015. They put in the hard yards to say we can actually scale. Anthropic showed that you can do that agentically. Chinese companies have shown you can train that in the open source and so on, right? So I think we are in a narrative which is going to continue for a very long time. So the most important decision for us is, are we a substantial player in the world? And the answer has to be yes, given our size, given our civilization, given the economy size and so on, right? So it's not even about today's model. The first point is, are you on this table, right? And therefore, no doubt we should be training models. By the way, not everybody needs to train models. An IT services company can go use the model and make money out of it. That's perfectly fine. But there should be some bets that are made. And more than one, like, let there be 5, 10 Sarvam if there's possibility. As you said, there is need for capital, there's need for talent. Those are the rate determining steps. And Sarvam, we have been sort of building that advantage and doing it, but we definitely need to be playing at this game, right? And that's the first part. On what we have done, right? And you also alluded to the journey we have taken, right? Notice that the founding team was not from one of these frontier labs that had already trained a model and so on. So our job was, if I were to look at it, what is the metric of this episode that we just concluded, which I call Sarvam 1.0? The metric was what fraction of the knowledge, etc., required to train a reasonably competitive model do we have in-house. That was a fraction we were maximizing, right? And we took various steps in that journey. First, we went about working with Llama, which was then the available open model. We actually sort of like fine-tuned Llama models to show that we can add Indian language skills. We realized in that process that you can't bolt on language to an existing model, but it was actually a deep collaboration. I sort of then joined the advisory board for Meta, sort of played a role there, and we actually ended up contributing to Llama 3.1, and we are the only company from India to contribute there. So that's how it started. We understood the process. Then when the first GPUs came to India, notice there were not many GPUs in India. When the first 1,000 Hopper series GPUs got connected in India, we were the first company to go and put our own money and say we'll pre-train a 2 billion parameter model. So we learned what pre-training data looks like, how do we create that, how do we create it for Indian languages, went and pre-trained it, ran these GPUs and so on. So we learned a lot in the process. In fact, Infosys also sort of like commercially bought a fine-tuned version of this for IT ops. And so we learned a little bit that step. Then it was very clear that we have to learn post-training. And so what we did was to take the Mistral small model, Mistral, I think the 30 billion parameter model, and we learned how to do supervised fine-tuning, reinforcement learning. In fact, at that time, Mistral did not have a reasoning model, and we, through our post-training pipeline, were able to add Indian language skills, post-train the model for reasoning, actually had a hybrid model, thinking, non-thinking, and scaled out reinforcement learning. And all these 3 efforts we did in the open source. We put our model, we put our detailed technical blogs on what we have done. In fact, the Mistral post was read by the Mistral guys, and they also commended it. The first blog on OpenHathi was read by the Meta guys, and they commended it. So while the world felt, hey, okay, these guys have picked whatever X $1 million and are doing something, our internal journey was maximizing knowledge in this space, right? Which we didn't have, and we didn't inherit in some sense, right? And then when the first set of bigger GPU opportunities came in India, we started training from scratch. And now what we have done over the last 6-8 months is trained from scratch these 30 billion parameter, 105 billion parameter. In fact, we also have in-house a 3 billion parameter model, which is very good on audio and vision and things like that. But the key part here was we did the entire hog of creating pre-training data at scale. Often you need like 15, 20 trillion tokens. We created that data set ourselves. Do we have a data vendor? No. We did all this work internally. It is actually quite interesting because these models get better. They enable people like us to do better using open source models, doing things on top of that. Then we did the fine-tuning and the reinforcement learning in-house, right? And then we released the model. In fact, we couldn't even finish the full amount of the supervised the post-training part. We'll release an update of the model with the full training done. But this is an interesting milestone. And to the best of my knowledge, outside North America and China, and if you leave aside Mistral, nobody has pre-trained from scratch a 100 billion plus parameter model, right? So to Vivek's point, if you think of it like haves and have-nots, this is the map, right? And now we have pre-trained this from scratch, and it is important for us to now compound on top of this and go to the next larger step. For us, that's a trillion parameter model. Even though India might use small models, the quality of the best model in your class decides how good a small model is, because most small models come from distilling from larger models, right? So it's super important for us to have a large model. And the definition of large is also changing we do know that there are even probably multi-trillion parameter models out there which are actually capable of next set of things, right? So for us, it is really about, to your point about is this frontier minus 3, 6, 9, I think I think we are slotting in about that 9-month period right now. We have to take that down to 6 months. And notice that we also have the advantage that, let's for example, the 105 billion parameter model on math, reasoning, STEM was as good as the 600 billion parameter DeepSeek R1 model, right? So there's also the advantage that there is a deflationary force, or that the intelligence is getting compressed into smaller models. So we have these two forces playing out. Models are getting more capable at a given size, and we are behind by a few months in terms of what we can do, and we keep moving, right? And our intent is that you should be able to have a no-regret alternative with using a Sarvam stack of models, right? At the smallest model, the multimodal models, and the reasoning large models, end-to-end, in about 6 to 9 months, right? Of course, there'll be better models out there which will continue to push the frontier, but you have a fully no-regret alternative with the stack that we have, right?
So say more about this, because I would love to understand if this is going to be, so let's say you build out the 1 trillion parameter model. I'm curious to sort of know, what does it cost a frontier lab to build that today for the, if they are ahead of everybody else? And does it cost the same to somebody who is 6 months, 9 months behind? And what, if not, then what compresses the cost? Because cost also matters, access to GPUs also matter. If it's all apples to apples, then it's just very hard. And then the question is like, what's the point? You're 6 months behind. They took $1 billion, you're taking $1 billion, and you're 6 months behind. Like, what's the point? So what's your view of, like, when you say no regret alternative, there is a 6-month gap, maybe a 3-month gap in a 6-month time frame, but it's a gap. Do people care? Some people care, seems like. Some don't. What's your worldview of who cares, and people who don't? Why don't they care? What are they optimizing for if they don't care about the sort of models?
See, I think that in terms of to your question, what brings the cost down? First of all, the GPU family itself brings the cost down, right? So every new generation of GPUs has enabled pre-training at larger scales, at low costs. Quantization aware training is reducing the costs again, and so on. So in fact, that is dramatic. It's not Moore's law scale. It's actually happening much faster, right? So if I were to look at a given benchmark on a particular test, right, the cost of training a model for that has been reducing dramatically. So there is that effect, right? So there are two things that we are not doing, right? Firstly, we are not putting out P2C products at zero cost, right? That is a major burn for these organizations, right? At least some of the organizations that are positioned in that way, right? The second thing is that there is a lot of experimentation happening at the utmost frontier. And these are expensive experiments, right? They take a lot of compute and a lot of things there. Again, we are not doing that now. Will we do that in 5 years? Maybe yes, right? But we are very focused on building the next capable model at the next size that matters, right? And I think the cost structure for that, the team structure for that, the overall effort towards that is very different, right? And I think to a point about who cares in the market, I think people will use the best thing that they're getting on that particular day, but the fact for us to be playing in the supply chain, right? That, hey, we have a model on whatever day that can do this, becomes important for us to then play in the market. And I'm sure that you are recognizing this as well. There's a lot of energy in the system where people would like to have things running in their control. AI is such an important component to what you have, and we would like to be able to give people models which are theirs. They can fine tune on their data sets, maybe done reinforcement learning on their environments, and then they think it's part of my infrastructure. I'm running it. That's the business we are playing for, right? Organizations wanting models to be part of their own security envelope, which they can run with no regret. It cannot be that sovereignty, which is not just a national concern, it's a concern for every company, comes at a cost. That should not be the case, right? And hence the companies that matter, the use cases that matter would play out. But that's what we are optimizing for.
And from here to a trillion parameter model, what do you think the company needs to prove or do? Like acquire data sets at much larger scale, acquire capital, where is it going to come from? What's your strategy there? Is capital something you worry about?
No, I think, obviously you need capital, but I think just to reinforce what Pratyush said, I think the fact that we are looking at frontier minus 9 months kind of a thing, the experimentation, right? I think that if you're actually absolutely at the frontier, the experimentation is extremely expensive. And if you're doing it later, you're running on better hardware. So therefore, that's also, and I think that is, but I think of the two, I think experimentation is probably the bigger thing. Once you know that, something can be done and somebody does it, it somehow becomes much easier for people to actually follow. And therefore, I think being a fast follower, does reduce. But having said that, I think these things nevertheless need significant capital. And we think that we are also going to take a cost view, right? In the sense that what is the, today, the earliest adopters of something, right, do something independent of what the cost is, or the thing that they're doing is so high value that it doesn't matter what the cost is. But at some stage, the cost will begin to matter. And I think that, if you actually play for that game, that, there will be these tasks where the cost will begin to matter, will also be at a very important place for us to play, in addition to the sovereignty of the enterprise and this thing. And I think as far as capital is concerned, I think we've earned the right to play. And I think that, we will, have the capital to play this next round out. I think that's something that we see, and we're quite confident that, we'll be able to do that.
I'm sure that capital is of interest to you, but just want to say one thing, right? So while we are talking about frontier minus X, this is still high grade R&D, right? Taking and running reinforcement learning on a large model at scale is not something that everybody is doing, or having the ability in a single company to create the data, to do the engineering, to do the training, do the evals, and then put them in products, right? Yeah. This is high-grade work, right? It's just that we aren't playing at the hundreds of billions of valuation where things are, and you can still have an important game to play. But is this something that lots and lots of companies would do? That I would not bet on, right? Yeah. So I think
it looks like in the world right now, probably 5 or 6 companies how to play this game, and you guys are one of the 5 or 6.
So for example, NVIDIA picked a set of companies globally to be part of its open source effort, and it's called Neutron Coalition, and we were there along with the friends from Mistral and other places, right? But the bottom line is, towards a trillion parameter model, there is a lot of R&D that gets done, right? And that gets created within Sarvam. There's a lot of IP around data. How do you train? What is the data mixture? All of these are hard problems. They're not even things that are being done in research papers, right? So you play that game only once you get the compute, the capital, and the talent to do it, right? And so I just wanted to capture that. While it is fast following, it's fast following in probably the most bleeding edge effort of humanity, right? Yeah. And it's a matter of capital, and it's a matter of talent, and so on.
So a direct question, from here to a trillion parameters, and it's a journey. At some point, it'll be 10 trillion parameters wouldn't be enough. I get that. What's the capital do you think it'll require? Is it in the billions, or tens of billions, or hundreds of millions? And what's the number of GPUs you require? And how much do we have right now?
No, so see, I think the capital is a continuous game, right? I think the zeros will keep adding, I suppose. I think right now in the game that we are playing, by the way, we have been, as a company, pretty, let's say, focused. I wouldn't say frugal. I think though we have been creative on things we have done, we have been very focused on how we do this, right? So I think it's hundreds of millions of dollars that is required to have, as I said, a no regret alternative stack, right? That's what we are building, right? And from there, it is a matter of scaling out the usage, which is when the scaling out of GPUs happens even more. It's very, very critical that Sarvam plays a role in sovereign infrastructure scale out in India. So working with data center providers to have a game where there is a lot of compute available for this stack to be then used at scale in a country.
Is it in the millions or hundreds of thousands?
GPUs has to be, in the country today, we have not that many GPUs, right? But it's scaling up. I think tens of thousands of Blackwells is what the country needs. Already, if you consider making AI available at scale to people today, right? And it'll keep increasing as more people adopt this, right? So, and the bottom line is this, right? And though it sounds like a little bit more on the impact side, the bottom line is our job is to maximize token consumption from various products, efforts that we are doing for things like, for example, every student having a tutor, every person having a doctor, right? These are the kinds of things that the demand for this is insane.
It's almost like the per capita token utilization is 0 right now.
It's a little bit more. For sure, a major fraction, as Vivek said, is outside, but it has to become 4-5 orders magnitude more, right? And that is what we are playing for, right?
Yeah. So now let's pull it all together, right? I mean, there is a ton of technology, product, building out. And I wanted to maybe just showcase this book that I read maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago almost. It's called Crossing the Chasm. I would recommend it to any and every founder, especially as they're entering a wave like this one. I'll read a small snippet from the back, which I think summarizes what the concept that they're trying to cover here is. But the idea of this is like technology alone in these large waves is not enough. Like you got to almost convince the market that there's a need for this in your life. There's importance of electricity, of oil, of CPUs and GPUs and AI tokens into your life. So what the book essentially covers, and I'm going to read it out really quickly, is that in technology adoption lifecycle, which begins with innovators and moves to early adopters, then early majority, and then late majority, and then finally laggards. So it starts with early adopters, people like you, me, and people that are watching this podcast perhaps. Early adopters, then early majority, which is probably the next 500 million people who are just waiting and I will not take this new airline because it's the first time it's flying, but I'll wait for a month, and if no crashes, I'll go pick that. And I've done that. I'm an early majority for airlines and things that could crash. Then late majority, which I think is everybody else, and then the laggard, which are like, the laggards. There is a vast chasm between the early adopters, people like you and me, and the early majority. They're right outside the door. And while early adopters are willing to sacrifice for the advantage of being first, the early majority waits until they know that the technology actually offers improvements in productivity in their lives. The challenge of innovators, for innovators and marketeers, is to narrow this chasm and ultimately accelerate adoption from the early adopters to the early majority. So that there's a lot of technology being handed in a nice packaging to the people. The technology does not need to change year over year as much over time, but the packaging needs to adjust and then assimilate this into society. How should society in India and globally think of Sarvam? What do we stand for? Are we an OpenAI alternative? Are we a Palantir? Are we a AI-enabled PricewaterhouseCoopers? Are we all of it put together? Like, how do you see yourself, and how should the world see you? And what's your brand gonna be 5 years out? What would you want to stand for?
Okay, multiple questions. It's a very, very interesting way to think about things. I think it stands true across technology generations, right? See, I think it's an interesting question. I feel that there will be dispersion across individuals and across organizations, right? Individuals who have some amount of agency in life will adopt this technology because the proof will be so adjacent to you. It's not like I want to move to NoSQL from SQL, right? You'll have to figure out whether it works. And so this is like you try something, it works, and you see the value of it, right? So for example, for us, the way to think about it is our voice AI platform going from an enterprise to a small and medium business, right? The small and medium business guy would be like, this is a value right away, and they like to adopt it, right? So I think it's a matter of agency. If individuals have agencies, they will adopt and they will create value for themselves and they'll move ahead, right? And it's going to go down from years to months to weeks in terms of being on the leading side. I think the challenge is more at an organizational level and eventually at the society level, because the tax here is human alignment, right? Aligning with your leadership that this is worth doing, aligning with people that, hey, this is not about job loss, aligning even society that it is important to build and not and to innovate. These are obvious things in our mind, right? Like we're strong believers that we should innovate, but there is doubt in the society whether we should innovate, right? These are the choices that we have to deal with, and I think organizations will struggle, right, to adopt. Individuals will see the proof very, very quickly.
Do you feel that people misunderstand what Sarvam stands for? I mean, there has been misunderstanding in the past. How do you guys see this now? Is it changing to you guys?
No, I think, obviously we are a company which, has a lot of ambition. And I think that, I think also things, are evolving, right? So therefore, and people see some aspect of what Sarvam is doing and they're looking at it from that lens. I think they're not looking at it from a holistic perspective. So therefore, then that may lead to some kind of a perception about what Sarvam is. Somebody may think, oh, you're a voice AI company, or somebody else thinks you're building foundation models or something else. So there are obviously people who have, different views in terms. But I think in the end, I think if you want to look at the ambition of Sarvam, right? I think that. What I'd say is that if a significant percentage of all tokens kind of used in the country in the next few years are from Sarvam, then we've been successful at what we want to be able to do. So, and that's a big ambition. And I think that it's also, if that is happening at a large scale, then it means that people are using AI at a scale that was, that really impacts their life. And I think the key point that Pratyush made about agency, right? People who have agency will adopt quickly. Organizations also, you need to figure out the people in the organizations who have agency, and those are the people you have to convince to actually make this change. And then whole organizations can move and shift. Yeah. So therefore, I think that's part of to be able to influence people who actually have agencies in different kinds of organization actually will be something that, yeah. And when they individually see what can happen, I think in the sense it is today, if you can imagine what the future will be, you can work towards building it. But if you don't have that, getting that imagination is really our job to make happen.
So on the perception thing, right? See, different people said, hey, why are you fine-tuning models? And in fact, I was in some meeting where 2 days back, and people were asking me some 7-8 times, is this trained from scratch, right? And then they don't believe that we did it and so on. I think that is entirely fair, right? People, there aren't many efforts in India which have the luxury of being built to do deep tech work, right? Actually, in some sense, that's the poverty of the country. We don't have enough bets on that. This is so natural in a country like the US, right? So there is a lot of expectation out of Sarvam, right? And that expectation comes with sometimes people feeling that they didn't stand up to that expectation. I think that's good stuff, right? I think we are mature enough to not worry too much about that and so on, right? It is an entirely different matter that we are playing multiple games. That is not usual. Like you list a list of companies and so on, right? We are very interested in voice AI, scaling that out as an infrastructure, not a product, not a platform, infrastructure for the country. We are very interested in having a sort of like a co-work-like experience, which is on self-hosted models, which you can scale out at low cost with sovereignty. We're very interested in building for the creators because language is such an important thing for us. We're interested in building frontier models. We're interested in running with data center companies and building the infra. So we are interested in all of these things, right? And depending on who is looking at what slice of it, that elephant metaphor is going to show up, right? Yeah. But we are comfortable with that, right? I think the main thing is, and this is what I think Vivek is saying, right? I think this is the time when the most important failure is not being ambitious. And that, I think at Sarvam, we are carrying that ambition, right? That we have to think really big and make it happen. And I think it's very doable. The tech is good. There is value to be created in India. And it's good that now we are seeing investors see that opportunity and really scale up from that point.
I'm just curious, would you ever want to go global? Or what does that look like? Who do you compete with? What's your strategy? What's your right to win globally?
On the global ambition, see, again, we remain clear on what we are building, right? And currently that build out is very specific to having the technical capability inside and the market positioning in India, right? But the technical capability that we build is not conditioned on specific things about India. That is applicable elsewhere. But making a market positioning that can actually capture value is a business decision that we'll make as we scale up. In fact, we are going to be having very important leaders come into the organization who will then sort of like take it to the next stage. In fact, we call it internally Sarvam 2.0 starts now, and it's going to be key leaders coming in who have wider vision, wider understanding of this. And then we make very clear market decisions on that. We are clear that the technical capability is generic and has applicability in a wide space, but what we focus on will become a business decision. I think going global or not, I think will also depend on having the right partners. And India has some strengths on that, which we'll explore.
Yeah. Amazing. I know we're on time and you guys are really busy, but it's been a real pleasure. Really excited to bring you back in, hopefully in a few months, and talk about Sarvam 2.0.
Yes.
Thank you again for your time, and it's been awesome.
Nice chatting with you.
Nice chatting with you. Thanks, Hemant.